So the results of my research essentially had many different things spin off from them. So the first results I will talk about are my modding research and my research into modding. So through my research itself, I found that the modding was generally accepted by all developers and welcomed, especially by open world game developers, because they loved what people did with their games. So Bethesda have had a constant understanding with their community, essentially, that after a certain amount of time, modding will be allowed on the games officially, but they didn't mind you modding unofficially initially. That somehow rhymed quite well. As I said, I did a research through a survey, which only got 5 responses in total, which is a little bit disappointing, but it does still tell us a little about this. So this was not handed out in paper like a lot of the others, but was posted in the exact same platforms as my fanfiction research, which I will talk about next. So it was posted on Facebook, Google+, and through Discord to people I knew. So initially, like all my surveys, I start with age and gender, because then I can find out demographics of who's actually asking or answering. And the modding survey skews very much to the over 20s. So of the 5 people I got a response back, 3 were 20 or over 20 years old. And then there were only 2 under 20, of which only 1 was 18, or 18, yeah, only 18, and then the other was 16 and under, which is an interesting concept. The results heavily skewed towards male, with 3 males against 2 females. For gender, and then I asked questions of what do you think of modding, and is it good for the game that you're modding? Like, does it adversely affect the game? Does it improve the game? What was your opinion? So the general consensus opinion is that modding is often good, whilst it can be damaging depending on the mod to the game. So several mods adding stupid things or comical things that detract from the game itself, such as churning all the assets of one thing. For example, Skyrim, there are several mods to turn all the dragons into Hulk Hogan, which is horrific, or turns all the dragons into Thomas the Tank Engines, which admittedly is an ingenious thing by the creator, but does detract from the game itself. Whilst mods are optional to download, is the way that you basically screen these mods. Is that looks cool, we'll add it to our game. Okay, it's not cool. The general consensus is yes, modding is good for the game. It can fix what developers have missed, fix what developers don't want to or can't be bothered to fix anymore, as well as adding other things. So Skyrim again is a very, very good research. If you just research Skyrim mods, it's a very good look into what modding can do for a game. So Skyrim The Elder Scrolls specifically has had millions of mods made for it, and of these mods you can get all the DLCs for Skyrim in a mod, which means you no longer have to pay for the DLCs if you so wish to do it that way, as well as such things as the Tamriel Unlimited mod, which allows you unlimited access to the entirety of the game world, not just Skyrim. So everywhere in the world of Tamriel, which is where Skyrim is located. You also have Oblivion, Morrowind, and other locations that are now opened for you to travel to. The way the creators deal with the now insanely huge map is that you have to fast travel to provinces of Tamriel, so Skyrim, Morrowind, Oblivion, the Sands, the Dunes, these kind of places. Then you can explore that map or that area design, and they'll add environmental obstacles like giant chasms or huge overbearing mountains that you can't climb or you can't pass. Unless you, of course, download a mod that allows you to do it. Which is where modding becomes almost like turning your character into a god, if you so wish. The other question I asked was, what do you think the effects of modding can be on a community? So, the way people responded to this was essentially, it depends, and depends on the mod we're talking about, and depends on the community. So it can, in some cases, divide and split a community more, with how some players will be, mods shouldn't be on the game, it detracts from the way it looks, whereas others can be, mods are great, they enhance the game. As well as the ones who are just like, mods are great because you can make it silly, stupid, or just enhance it for comedic value. And it wholly depends on the mod. So you can talk about Skyrim again. I'm going to keep on coming to Skyrim and then another Bethesda game called Fallout 4, because these two are heavily modded games. Heavily modded games nowadays, or the most modded games you can find, and the mods on there range from the bizarre and crazy to the weird and creepy, all the way up to, hey, we made an entirely new game, we're just calling it a mod, as is the case for the Tamriel Unlimited mod, which could probably stand on its own as an entire new Elder Scrolls Skyrim game. Such mods as the Tamriel Unlimited mod, or for Fallout 4, the better base building mod, which just improve aspects of the game, don't generally divide a community, but unite them, in the sense that, yes, we're getting better content, yes, we're fixing things about the game that Bethesda for some reason doesn't want to do. Which is the other thing the modding does, is it very much can bring people, closer together for the game, and actually start talking about other aspects of the game. The last question I asked is, do you think mods should be paid for, and why do you think this? The idea behind this question basically stems from a single comment I saw on a lot of mods, or a lot of posts, saying mods should be paid for and half of it should go to the developer. Kind of like a mini DLC, if you so wish, or downloadable content, because most DLCs are paid for, so you have to buy them off the mod developers and then go from there. The answer I got is generally no. And I say generally no. The answer I got was a very definitive no, it should not be paid for. The reasons varied from it's just free and fun stuff that people do, to modders don't have the money or don't want to be paid kind of thing. If I read one of the actual questions, there was a thing is from one of my respondents I got, I think that the issues with this is that modders are then profiting from the intellectual property of someone else. Obviously they think that modders would get paid all of it, but that's also a viable thing. It depends on the nature of the mod and how much a resemblance it bears to the original. I think that people should be paid for what they do, as long as it doesn't determinately or detrimentally affect the original content. In other words, people think the modders shouldn't get paid for what they do because they'll be making money off other people's ideas, but they could get paid for their mods if it's beneficial to the game, i.e. it's not one of the scam or stupid mods. I keep on saying stupid. They aren't stupid because they're incredibly creative in what they've done, but they're silly, stupid mods, essentially. They aren't detrimentally stupid, they're just silly and stupid. Which is what everyone needs once in a while in their life. Just a silly, stupid thing to laugh at. Which is why people create those mods. My personal opinion is that modders shouldn't get paid, not shouldn't get paid for their mods, but should, because people can get paid for their mods if they so wish, but they should bear in mind that people won't pay for mods. Because people are so used to people not paying for mods, and then people just skipping over DLC content most of the time, it'll kind of go like a DLC. And people won't be interested in modding anymore, and it would probably cause the death of the entire modding community style until someone stops asking for money to pay this and moves on. Which is not a good thing at all. So the next bit of research I did before the modding one, I actually did this one, is my research into fanfiction. So again, I looked at online resources and what effectively what they said about fanfiction, and the general results were that fanfiction was a bad thing. When I typed in just the initial Google search, people's opinion on fanfiction, the first 6 results that I got was, why are people terrified of fanfiction? Why is fanfiction so bad? Why we should stop fanfiction where it is? Why fanfiction should be stopped? And why you shouldn't let your children read fanfiction. Most of these, as a result, focused on the bad side of fanfiction. So most fanfiction being poorly written, or most fanfiction being about essentially smut or lemons, which are fanfiction terms for porn, essentially, or sex within the content of the story, or many other things being mostly sexual related. Other arguments against it were that the original creator doesn't get anything out of it, which I believe is false, and my research actually quite a bit contradicts that statement. So the first article that I read and got hooked up on quite a bit is the why fanfiction why we're so terrified about fan fiction. And this argument basically singles in on women, or young teenage girls, essentially. Because according to this article, most fan fiction writers are young teenage women. Which is actually contradictory, because through my own research, through asking quite a few people I know who write fan fictions, I didn't actually, unfortunately, record this research, which I should have done, but they didn't want me to, essentially. They wanted it to keep as confidential as possible, and basically said, yes, you can write about us, you can't mention our names, you can't really mention much about us. They essentially said, no, I write fan fiction, and that was about it. And they then gave me their opinions of fan fiction is a great way of letting out your own desire, as well as not capitalizing, like making money off of, but capturing other people's wants in your story, or just expanding a world that you're invested in and you love to be more than the creator actually had it be, or change some things to improve the storyline to how many of the fans or people wanted it to be, rather than what it was. So, in their eyes, there have been many stories and tales, or TV series or movies that have had terrible endings, or something has happened to a character that everyone loves, so they've gone back, changed the ending, and brought back that character, so that they don't have to essentially say goodbye to that character, or they've kept the story the way it was until the end, and then they've changed the end to leave it more open-ended for their first version of the movie or book, and then they've gone and made their own story using their characters and world to then expand on the universe that the author had made. This article I found that focused mainly on teenage girls and saying that they were the ones writing it, went incredibly sexist, in the sense that the writer of this article essentially said that allowing teenage girls to have any access to media that isn't mainstream is a dangerous thing. So essentially saying that unless it's approved and used by everyone, you shouldn't be touching it because it will make you corrupt of some description. And it's only when it becomes mainstream that you should let teenage girls look at it. Which is a very, very bold statement to make that I personally highly disagree with, and I'm sure there are hundreds of thousands of other people, mainly women and such, that will very, very much disagree with that statement. But the result after this was I found a article. There was someone, an author had written about fan fictions, and she's a famous author about being against fan fiction. And essentially she wrote a very heated comment and post about why she doesn't like fan fiction, why she doesn't like people writing fan fictions, why she despises people who write fan fictions. And essentially, her argument was, go out and be creative yourself. The only article I could find relevant to this, because she later then took down the article and erased all traces of it she could with her wealth and power, but there was a blogger who did a kind of deconstruction article of it. So they got the writer's point of view across, and then put themselves in bold and added what amendments of what actually was happening. So some of the statements made were be original and creative and make your own characters. I myself, this is from the writer's side, I myself made my characters entirely of my own, and they are of my own creation. The response the blogger or the article writer had to this was, I basically quote, with a little bit of misjudgment, that's a load of bullshit. That's like saying that Star Wars and George Lucas didn't take inspiration from westerns, and that George Lucas made all of Star Wars himself in his head with no inspiration whatsoever. Which is essentially what fan fiction is. People are taking inspiration from a movie or story and wanting to continue it in their way. Which is the same as this writer writes books that are essentially Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones mixes with probably Heart of the Dragon added in. Which contradicts her claim of, I don't take inspiration from other people's work, because there is literally a character in her book that is an elf with long blonde hair, wears predominantly green, stands about 6 something tall, uses an elven bow, and shot an elephant about 20 times in the head, which to me very much sounds like Legolas from Lord of the Rings in the final battle, where he shoots a giant elephant about 20 times in the head with a bow, whilst wearing all green in brown boots with long blonde hair, whilst also being an elven ranger. Whilst this idea could have come from her head, I find it improbable that she chose to shoot an elephant particularly, in the head so many times. This writer has the writer has other things. So one of her things is that she stated that lots of people ask her questions of different things to try and catch her out. One of the questions he gets asked quite a lot is, what's the harm in fan fiction? To which her cocky ass response is generally, what's the benefits in fan fiction? To which the writer of the article and myself both can say about the same time after I read that, and then I read the next bit, oh, I don't know, it prompts creativity, it as a stepping stone to your writing career, so you now know how to write stories, even if they're slightly taken from other people, but you've changed them yourself. You know how to adapt, you know how to create, you know how to write, you know how to compromise, you know how to do grammar, spelling, checking, and all that lovely stuff. But an interesting fact I found out later on is that most fan fiction writers, the good ones that write really big stories, most good fan fictions are over 400,000 words, which is a lot considering that most big issue books, so the Lord of the Rings book, or the first book of the Lord of the Rings, is only about 300,000 words. Most novels are only 250,000 to 300,000 words. And fan fiction writers write that 400,000 words in about a year. So they'll generally write 400,000 words a year. And because most fan fiction writers, through research, are still in school, university or college, they write 400,000 words a year, in addition to however many millions of words they have to write for their university course, dissertations, or their college course, or their schoolwork every week, as well as doing whatever extracurricular activities they do on the weekends. And for people at university or college, they have to do that, or they do that optionally, willingly, in addition to university and college work, naturally, But in addition to most of them have full-time jobs. So they're working full-time in college, leaving college or university for the day, and going to a full-time job to pay off the fees. Which then they're leaving that essentially, going home, eating and writing a book. Which is 400,000 words long. That is commitment if I've never heard it before. That is one of the reasons why fan fiction is such a big thing. Because people are so committed to it. But after the research I did online, I made a survey which got me a grand total of 13 responses. And of course I asked my normal questions at the beginning of how old are you and what's your gender. Just to be fair to everyone. So this fanfiction with its survey with 13 results skews heavily male once more. It was posted on Facebook and it has 12 responses that are male, 2 that are female, and it skews heavily to the over 20s once more, with only 2 people being under 20 and them being 18 years old. The result of this in my head is that over 20s are more like 20s and over are more willing to share their opinions with the world about these kind of subjects and these kind of topics, whereas younger ones aren't quite that confident, or over 20s are more likely to comment about fanfiction particularly. The questions I asked for this are: what are your opinions on fanfictions? Do you think fanfiction is good or bad for the original content? And why do you think this way? So, the general response to what's your opinion on fanfiction is very mixed. So, the way that people regard fanfiction is that it's either really, really good for and they like it, or depending on what it is, it's bad and shouldn't be there. Many people say it's a good way to express yourself, and lots of people say that it's interesting, an insight into how other people think, and then other people say that it's just not appealing and it's just not well done. But none of it is overly negative of it shouldn't exist, to my knowledge. Do you think fanfiction is good or bad for the original content? It was very much dependent once more. In some cases, yes, it's good for the original content, such as the big novel style fan fictions that fully expand and realize the world is of course good for the original content because it's expanding the world a lot more and people stay invested in it longer. Let's say the writer's got another book coming out but you can't wait for it, so you go tap into the fan fiction. There you go, more extended world. That could also be detrimental to the world that the creator's writing, because it could form false expectations, like, I want it to be like this now, not like what you've written. Other things that can happen is simply writers don't like smut and other sexual things happening in books that don't have it or shouldn't have it in their eyes. So if you had essentially a child's TV program that someone has decided to have character A and character B have sex or have a relationship that isn't there, or as many fan fictions do have, is have very, very opposite relationships. So there will be enemy and good guy relationships. So the guy that tries to kill this guy constantly actually just loves him and wants to kill him because he loves him for some reason, or something along those lines. Other people have just given the one word comment of it's good, it's bad. There are more people saying it's bad, just straight off bad, rather than the good comment. And everyone else has contextualized their opinions. And then I asked why they feel this way. So they contextualized why they kind of felt this way in the above question, with whether it's good or bad. But many people just essentially gave the answer of it's plagiarism. I feel this way because fanfiction has done stuff for me. I've read fanfiction and it just isn't good. Or as one person nicely put it, characters already exist. Which essentially tells me that they don't think the characters should be rewritten into your image because they already have pasts and ideas behind them. Lots of people lots of people still think that when you hear fan fiction you can essentially think of it as sex on paper, which isn't true for fan fiction as general. Fan fiction in general, there are a lot of essentially smut fan fictions, but the general populace of a fan fiction website, such as fanfiction.net, which is entirely dedicated to it, which has millions of copies of fan fiction out there. Not just millions of copies of fan fiction, but thousands of different stories on the entire alphabet's worth of movies, TV shows, books, comics, posters. There are posters out there that were made and people have written fan fiction just purely based around the poster. So, for example, there's a book called The Dread, which is essentially written about a Walking Dead poster that essentially covers the psychological terror experienced in the zombie apocalypse, hence The Dread. And it was based entirely around one poster. He'd never seen The Walking Dead, and he based it entirely on all of the movies he'd seen about the apocalypse and the zombie apocalypse. So World War Z, I Am Legend, other horror movies with monsters, and essentially took you into context that the character had been alone for a fair few years surviving against zombies, so he was already mentally unstable, and then he found a group of survivors, and the first thing he did with the first group of survivors he found was beat them to death and kill them, thinking they were zombies. The remaining group of survivors that he found out that he'd done this, and when confronted, he essentially told them they were covered in blood and looked like zombies, so I killed them, whilst clutching his gun, which he never slept without. Force of habit, of course, for 4 years of paranoid, I'm going to be eaten by zombies at any second. But there's so much more to fan fiction. Through the research I've done and through my personal experience with fan fiction, there is so much more to fan fiction than just sex or wrong relationship choices or essentially messing with the storyline too much. A good source for myself is that I like dragons, Specifically, I don't like how every single time I see a dragon in a movie or TV series, it's dragon, kill it. It's bad, kill it. The only movie I've somehow, the only movie, TV series, and book franchise I have found so far that essentially criminalizes dragons, then makes them main characters and important as well as good, is the How to Train Your Dragon series. Because I actually really like that series, and some of the fan fictions that are written about it are a bit, okay, that's a bit, because of some of the things that they do with some of the friendships in the series and movies. But they also have good alternate universe style things. So fan fictions can be very easily divided into two very clear categories inside of themselves straight off the bat. Canon and AU. So canon universes aren't strictly canon in the sense that they're fully canon and you should count their word as gospel for the actual writer. They're generally just, they stick with the canon law as much as they can. Alternate universes change something fundamental about the universe. So for example, with the How to Train Your Dragon universe, they changed it so one of them was, instead of dragons and humans, it's vampires and werewolves, with werewolves being the Vikings and the vampires being the dragons. One of these particular stories has a few interesting concepts, because they're not strictly based off the movies as such. They also mix in the books, and they also mix in the TV series, or the 2C TV series, as well as the mini movie TV shots that they got of like Call of the Night Fury and such. But fan fiction itself is a way of bringing a community somewhat together, because even when people are arguing about ships, so ships are pairs of people, so people will take character A and character B, make them love each other even if it's one-sided or not, and that'll be a ship. So I want this character and this character to be together. That's a ship. And it can happen with anyone and anything at any point, any time. For example, you can have Batman and the Joker, which isn't a good one, because Batman and the Joker are opposite ends of the spectrum, but that's an example of what can happen, and has happened, very much has happened. Or you can have the obvious ones of like Batman and Catwoman, or Batman and Poison Ivy, because Batman and women in general. They are ships, essentially. Which is generally what divides communities. If a community is banded together, generally the thing that divides them but unites them is the shipping wars. So shipping wars are essentially, my ship is better than yours. And it is exactly what it sounds like, of people on the internet going, these two are better together than these two people. It generally happens between people who want a same character as the other guys being with someone else. Which is a very commonplace thing. There are quite a few communities that are just like, yep, we all agree, these guys should be together, these guys should be together, these guys should be together, and those guys should never go together ever again. And that's how community is affected, in my opinion, and from my knowledge and a bit of my research, is how fan fiction generally affects community. But that's not just fan fiction that does that, it's everything that does that. That is the effect of basically a story on a group of people. They will take it and play with it and change it as they see fit. and make it their own. Which isn't a bad thing. In fact, it's a very good thing, and this should be highly encouraged. But there are many people who see it as not very good. In the context of my project, however, modding and fanfiction particularly are quite relevant, because my project's about consumer technology and community, and how amateur creators could rival commercial creatives. And the simple way is playing to your masses. So a bit of research that I was never actually able to find any practical resources for this, but I was able to find opinions from people I knew and asked, was that the question of why do people make mods and why do people make fanfiction? What makes something worth modding and what makes something worth fanfiction? Writing fanfiction about? And the general answer is, if it's worth modding, there's either something wrong with it, something that needs changing, or it's too good to not have some silly stuff put in. Generally it's the first two. So back to Skyrim, a lot of mods are graphics overhauls. So they just upgrade how the game looks and they just make it look better. Other ones are bug fixes. So for Fallout again, the building system is quite chunky and clunky in some places. And there's a mod out there just makes it work better and flow smoother with each other. And not have the clunkiness of your block when you're placing stuff down in snap mode, warp suddenly above you in the next floor above you and then place itself instead of placing it where you want it to be. As well as adding other base building elements and upgrading it. A very good mod, example of a mod, it's not a good mod in the sense that it's buggy and laggy, it's got tons of problems, but it's an example of a mod that is so it's an example of a mod that has mods on it. It's a mod within a mod within a mod. Yeah, we're going several layers into this inception here. It's a simple game now that's recognized everywhere called Garry's Mod, made by a guy called Gary, and it was made for the Half-Life engine, or the Source engine from Half-Life, for Half-Life. And it's basically a sandbox game they made for Half-Life. I think Half-Life 2, instead of Half-Life 1. Probably both at this point. Which, in the end, had so many downloads and so much uptake that the game itself didn't stay a mod. The game itself changed from being just a mod to being an entire game itself called Garry's Mod, which then on its own didn't even not let people, it just straight up opened its source code to people. And you can make an add-on, which is what a mod is called. You can make a map, you can make guns, you can make cars, you can make models, you can make textures, you can make entirely new game modes for Garry's Mod for free. And you can put it up there for free, which is an amazingly interesting concept to look at. The only point in Garry's Mod that you still have to pay for stuff is hosting your own server. And even then, you're not paying the people who made Garry's Mod for that. You're making you're paying an independent server hoster who then hosts it on the Garry's Mod platform to host it for you. Which is ludicrous in the first sense, or lucrative business deals for those people. But that is what happens. You can, another mod that's now a standalone game, but is still a mod on other versions of the game, is Arma 2 DayZ. So the DayZ mod essentially takes the Arma 2 game and adds zombies and health and bleeding and the need to eat, the need to drink, the need to rest, and makes it an open world game. With no mission, no objective, you just need to survive as long as possible and not get your brains eaten out by zombies or blown out by players. There's many comments about DayZ and how it's got terrible graphics. Everyone knows, but DayZ's good. Like, even with terrible graphics, you play DayZ. If you like DayZ, you're going to play it. If you don't like it, then you play it, and then you're just going to go, well, this is terrible graphics, but it's kind of fun. Which is in Arma 3, the upgraded one, which has better graphics. There's the new version of DayZ that has come out. It's not strictly DayZ, but it's like APOC, it's called, which is essentially DayZ, but different. Because the guys who made DayZ basically struck a deal and made DayZ standalone. With DayZ standalone being worse than DayZ the mod. Because they somehow messed up transferring Arma things to their game. As a result, the standalone is worse than the mod, graphic-wise, building-wise, and just general play-wise. But people, in the first few months of DayZ, the mod, existing, there wasn't just people killing you, because right now DayZ, if you join, you have two options. You can hide in the woods and build a house and survive as long as you can over there with farming and such, or you can go kill people, because sure as heck you're barely going to run into someone who ain't going to kill you. And in the first month of DayZ, this wasn't true. In the first month of DayZ, there were people joining the game and they were role-playing in it. They were fully invested in their characters. They were making new characters in this world that then survived and did what they wanted. For example, Frankie on PC, who does a lot of DayZ stuff, not so much now, but did do a lot of DayZ stuff, revealed a few recordings from the first half of his time in DayZ, from when he first joined. And he logged into the server, he got all the way up to getting some good guns, some good equipment, moving around, didn't stop in one place, didn't build a base or anything like that. And 3 really big helicopters flew over him, and he took cover and hid, hoping they didn't see him. And then they landed kind of around him. So he was surrounded, and some guys jumped out, and other guys stayed in the helicopter. And he was essentially kidnapped. RP kidnapped. He didn't want to lose his progress, so he played along. They stripped him of his gun, and they took his beans. Because there's an entire joke of DayZ, which is the most rarest food in DayZ is a can of beans. And thus, cans of beans become essentially currency in the beginning of the game. Or in this first few months of the game, cans of beans were worshipped as gods. As jokes, cans of beans were worshipped as checkpoint pieces in minigames that people set up. Right, your job is to go to this container, get the can of bean, and get back to your base. First one to do it wins. Which had people murdering everyone on enemy teams to find the guy with the can of beans in his backpack, to then run back to their team to get shot by someone else. And this community grew in a few months to have factions form, as well as just generally being played with instead of just being essentially Battlefield with survival mechanics. In fact, the closest thing you can find to DayZ now is PlayerUnknown's Battleground. If you took PlayerUnknown's Battleground and added in the fact that you have to drink and eat, you have DayZ, which is sad and unfortunate, because that's what it is to people now. It's a first-person survival game. It's an FPS survival game. FPSS, as they're called, which is basically you run around shooting people and don't die yourself. Whereas the first month of DayZ, you would fly around in your helicopter after you found one, or car, or whatever, and you'd kidnap people, or you would join people, or you would start cults and religions in some cases, with people in the game. Which led to factions and wars and community growing and falling and growing and falling, and then it started teetering out and dying because everyone had done mostly everything, and then people just left and people just started killing people on sight even if they were meant to be friendly or not. And it died, and then the new version of DayZ came out, and people were starting again to RP and play around again instead of just straight up killing people. There's a scene that I'm remembering in my head now that I'm talking about this from Frankie's video in the new Epoch, and he essentially finds a huge attack helicopter with his friend, and they fly around and they fly, and in this new version there are hordes. So if you make too much noise, literal hundreds of zombies swarm you. And the idea behind it is that they found this helicopter and then they saw a guy being attacked. This guy was running like on foot, and the guys were going around in the Humvee attacking him. So they absolutely obliterate the Humvee with missiles, going over the guy who's been attacked. And in the second that they go over low enough for you to hear, because there's a ranged voice system, you hear, "Please don't hurt me," shouted up at the helicopter. And they land, they get the guy in the back, he's injured, so they start medicing him, and whilst they're medicing him, another Humvee comes through the trees at them, shoots them a bit, and then turns around and starts shooting at something else, which you'll announce the presence of a horde by a thick fog that precedes the horde. And then the horde appears. And you just hear Sada go, "Oh, Frankie, we got a horde." "What? I'm bouncing in this guy though." And they literally take off in the last few seconds and survive this horde. If they hadn't have taken off when they did, they would have died, they would have lost the helicopter, they would have lost the friend they picked up, all their equipment, and about 3 months worth of work to get to that point. Which I think is what a survival game should be like. You should be worried for your character's life. You should be worried about that thing. This mod brought together an entire community, and as such, other mods have brought together communities. The Skyrim mods have brought together communities as well as Broken Apart. The mods and fan fictions written about games and movies have brought together communities. As a result, my research and my task directly affect my project, in the sense that my project is this research. My project is wholly about what I'm talking about right now. How just playing a game, recording with standard software that you can get free, editing it with standard software you can get free that isn't used in the commercial world, can produce a story and can produce a notion, a world, a character that people can relate to somehow. You don't know what it's like to be in the zombie apocalypse, but you can relate to that character still. You know what's going through their heads, you know what they're thinking, you know what could be happening. And that's a powerful, powerful thing to have at your disposal. That's how amateur creators can rival commercial creators. By playing to the fanfictions, to play to the mods, to play to the people who will take your work, throw it away, bring it back, tear it to pieces, rebuild it the way they want it. Because it's still your work. They're still, if they're going to read it, they're going to be reading a semblance of your work, and they're going to be knowing that it's work done by you. even if it's not fully recognizable. All fan fiction writers write in sections about work. So everything on certain fan fiction sites is categorized into TV. So you look at the TV tab, you find a TV program name. You click on that name and you now know what program you're talking about. The 3,000 fan fictions you've got about your TV program are clearly labeled under your TV program's name. And if people are looking at it, they know who you are already and they're interested. And they want to know more about the world. The people have gone out of it. And they still know your name. So they might go back and re-watch your series. A new episode of your series is coming out, and they've read all the tens of thousands of fan fictions because they're so invested in your world. They flock to your series. That's how amateur creators will beat commercial creators, by playing to the people, not playing to the money or the companies. Because people, the consumers, are the ones who dictate most of what happens in a thing. Well, that's how it should be. My research into short films, whilst I mainly conduct it in this similar way to the way I researched the fan fiction and modding communities, I went about it slightly differently for short films. So I didn't produce a survey for my short film research. As such, the only contextual evidence I have is the articles themselves that I looked at, as well as a YouTube video made about short films versus feature films. In this YouTube video, as well as another bit of article that I looked at, we have several directors who have directed, one's directed several horror movies, another one directed several sci-fi based movies and things in those areas. As a result, we do have professional industry standard people who are talking about this subject, so they are well versed in what it needs, what goes into making a feature film as well as short films, since their processes aren't too dissimilar. Whilst I was doing my practitioner report, I was researching into Christopher Nolan and Hans Zimmer partially, and both of them agreed on the consensus that it's so much harder to write a short film because you have so much less time than the feature film. Which is the general consensus everyone else shares, that you have so little time to get your point across that it's harder to write for it. The general idea of short film versus feature film is, considering today's technology, people are going out and making their own feature-length films, which, for context, a feature-length film is generally any film over 40 minutes, because any film under 40 minutes is considered a short film, as a generalized term. There is no actual set time limit for a short film or a feature film, but that is the generalization. If it's shorter than 40 minutes, it's a short film. So
we now have people going out and making feature-length films, so hour, 2 hour long features that aren't overly well done with camera work, aren't too expensive to produce, but get that point across in more time. Whereas we also then have, on the opposite end of the spectrum, people doing short films that cost a couple of £1,000 or dollars to make, and are getting their point across just as easily in that short film format as a feature film. Contextually to my project, I want to know what the difference between a short film and a feature film truly is. What can a short film do that a feature film can't do exactly? Through this singular idea, I have many questions I asked myself whilst researching, such as why people make short films over feature films, what are the advantages of a short film over a feature film, and what can you do in a short film over a feature film. The general consensus is that you can do anything you want in a feature film, you can't do anything you want in a feature film if it's tied to a company. So whilst a short film that you do on your own, or a feature film you do on your own, or in your own small team where you have control, you're not tied down to a big motion picture company like Marvel, Warner Brothers, Disney, you can do it about basically whatever you want, in whatever style, with whatever context you want. Which is the creative freedom people seek in a short film. But you can now do it with feature films yourself. Whereas as soon as you tie it to a studio, that studio, or the big studios, the corporation studios and the massive companies, want something that will sell to the masses, not to a small chunk of the population. Which is where fan-made short films and other short films that people are making get dwarfed by the bigger films, because most of the platforms they're launching them on are YouTube or other video platforms that are free, opposed to getting cinema screenings. Cinemas won't, so far I haven't found any evidence to say cinemas will screen or won't screen short films under 40 minutes. To my knowledge, they don't like screening short films, because that means people are in the cinema for less time, thus buy less stuff at the beginning. And the cinema kind of gets a representation of playing short films when people want longer ones. The video itself went in depth of reasons for and reasons against short films, and then just general comments about short films. So most of the reasons against short film consisted of you can make a feature film for much cheaper and than you used to be able to, and if you're coming out of film school or something and you want to make a feature film, you might as well do it and find out what it's going to take firsthand, rather than getting this false notion from a short film that it's going to be it's just going to be like that but longer. Whereas they don't dismiss that short films are a useless platform. They generally consist that short films are a good platform if you want to make something that you can show to people as I can do this, so hire me kind of piece of work, rather than this is some work I generally did enjoy because you've already got a job, or this is what you want to do. Those who were for short films agreed that short films are a very good platform for creativity and selling yourself to a company to make a feature film. But they also say that short films in their own right are a great, amazing platform to get your ideas out, do your ideas, without having to worry about the massive production of a feature film. And it's more likely that a short film can be released on quick, faster, easy platforms like YouTube. You can break it down into 3 sections or less to post it on Facebook and other free platforms, and start getting it out there if you don't want to worry about the money. Which is the other reasons I'm doing this project is to save companies who want to do it this way the money and compete with commercial work. Still, without, well, just compete with them, because whilst they have tons of money, they can't quite come up with the originality that others can. As a result, those who were against short films. So in this YouTube video, we generally have a few people arguing for and against, so they're kind of playing devil's advocate. I don't quite know which ones are truly against and which ones are truly for short films, because they never actually say. And they're pretty even on their opinions if they're doing both sides. So I'd say they're more indifferent, but this is the argument that's going on, so we'll do it. As a result, the general consensus is that short films are good, used for commercial, when used to get your ideas out, but that's about all. And the idea that they have a very firm idea that short films have had their time and are dying because shorter, cheaper feature films are coming out by the guys who are making short films. Which is understandable. The guys who are making short films and making them well have transitioned to making feature films and have started all the way back at the bottom where they were with short films before. So there would be that lull and gap in short films from people. But firmly, the era of short film isn't dead. There are plenty of companies out there that are making TV series as well as short films and short videos. So a reasonably big one is Corridor Digital, and they made a feature film, a feature film, and they made many short videos, shorts and short films in addition to that. So the feature film they made was called Sync, and Sync basically was about a guy who had multiple body clones, and if he died he transferred to a new clone. Essentially. He wasn't, I don't think, the only one who could do this, but he was the agent in the area who could do this. And he does fought crime. He was like a cop who could do this. And then they had a short film which was Tether, which was their first kind of short film they did. And Tether was kind of like the apocalypse. Something had happened. Society had kind of broken down into factional chaos, and from there people were just surviving with guns as well as trucks and stuff going around. And they find a girl in the short film, and she says a few words, a few people get shot, they go off, and then a huge object falls from the sky to the ground, which is just a cable going all the way up to space. The Tether, and it's kind of like a space elevator that's dropped from space. So it drops down, connects, and they lower a platform down, which deploys a super soldier with a minigun on it, which finds the girl, kills the guy that was with the girl, and that's where they ended there. So that was their kind of trailer, short film introduction to Tether, which was going to be a feature film they were making, but it kind of got cancelled and they haven't revisited the idea again. They made very recently for PUBG, or PlayerUnknown's Battleground, the mobile version, they made a short film, the official short film for PlayerUnknown, that showcased some of the things that happen in the game. So it follows two characters in their van as they're driving through the desert. They accidentally run over a guy. They stop. The guy that they run over, who was chasing the guy, who jumps in the back of their van, who then asks them to go outside the giant force field that was behind them to go save his friend. there's an ensuing gunfight after that. We're demonstrated that frying pans in the game are bulletproof by the fact that the characters are continuously blocking bullets with frying pans at times. And it basically showcases that there are no true alliances in the end, because they get to the centre of the circle, it's only those 4 people left, and the 2 hippies that they've been called all through the thing, basically just turn around and say, "We aren't hippies, we're libertarians," and proceed to shoot the other 2 guys they helped and win the game. Which is a lovely, interesting premise, because that's exactly what happens in the game. 100% that is exactly what happens in the game. You'll get people in squads or solos who'll team up with you, then shoot you in the back as soon as they get the chance, or it's convenient. Other companies that do short films as well as like feature-length films are Rooster Teeth and Rocket Jumper. So Rocket Jumper mainly focuses on short films, shorts, and TV series. Rooster Teeth have gone much more away from their short films and shorts to TV series, with Rooster Teeth coming up to the close of season 16 of their series Red vs. Blue, which has been going on for maybe 3 years, and Rocket Jumper, having just a year or so ago finished their TV series Video Game High School, which both of them are very successful. Both of those series are very successful. Rooster Teeth, in addition to Red vs. Blue, have been doing a TV show anime called RWBY, which is on its 4th season, just finished the 4th season, should be getting its 5th season soon, and are working on that. But the original Red vs. Blue, it hasn't changed much, but the very first episode of Red vs. Blue was basically in Halo. I believe it was Halo 2. They didn't have any camera work kind of stuff. It was basically they cracked the game, removed the arms and HUD from a player, and that guy was the camera guy, and they had all the other characters as Halo characters, like actual model sprites in the game, and all the motion in that game was simply walking around, pointing and shooting guns, and head bobs. So as someone talked, they would have a tendency to kind of half wiggle and their head would bob up and down as they talk, in time with their talking. So it seems like they were normally talking within their armor. And many different jokes. There were parts where they killed off characters and the characters came back. Of course, it was based around Halo, which you can respawn in. So there was the old running joke of, how did you get back? You were killed by a car, kind of thing. Other things that they did with this was they have later on in the seasons they introduced 3D animation and motion capture. So they then ended up having bigger, more fluid fights that the Halo engine just doesn't do, because you don't have hand-to-hand combat in Halo at all. And they're able to add custom models and skins to people, which they then took and actually transferred that kind of skill and knowledge straight to RWBY, which had motion capture fighting, and was the brainchild of the departed Montio, who was a very good motion capture artist and series developer. But there aren't, other than those 3, to my knowledge, there aren't many other short film producers on YouTube. There are, which is what my project's also about, series creators out there who create small series based around characters in game. So Machinima, similar to Red vs. Blue. Except they don't go out to perspective of characters. There'll be a few shots in some of the games like Space Engineers, which I'm using myself, which use the spectator cam to get some cinematic shots, but most of the time it's recorded from the perspective of the player, like a gameplay video, with the guys playing in character of that character. So they never actually raise their space helmets up unless they are looking at someone else. If they're looking at someone else, that person can raise their helmet up if they so wish, because the idea is the HUD you see with all the blocks and stuff from the base game is the HUD you have inside your helmet. So when you lift that up, that's meant to disappear, but in game, if you lift your visor, it doesn't. So they only lift the helmet if they're looking at someone else. Saying that whilst you're looking through their eyes, you can't tell if their helmet's up or not. So the general rule they give is if they're talking about readouts on their screen and they're not looking at a computer terminal, they've got their visor down because they're giving readouts on there. Or they're playing the animation where they look at their wrist computer, which means they can say that it's coming through on their PDA on their wrist. Back to short films after that little tangent. The idea that short films are dying, which I was talking about in this, is that yes, short films are not dying. So the problem is that short films aren't particularly well advertised or versed. So you have to be looking for short films to find short films specifically. Or if you're like me, or a few other people who look at Rooster Teeth Quabbit or other animated series or series in general that have been made by small creatives. So if you watch Corridor Digital or people like them, you will get hints from YouTube to go look at channels like CG Bros. So CG Bros don't make animations and stuff too much. They generally just keep short films made by other people on their channel, so they don't get lost and other people can watch them. And there have been award-winning short films all over the place. One of them was Rainmaker, which is basically the world has run out of water and all water is now harvested. There is Cloudmaker. All water is now harvested from the clouds, and there's like 3 or 4 clouds remaining, and this one person in her plane has found a way to seep clouds to make a storm to restore water. And you find this out in the first few minutes of the thing, that she's got a machine that she needs a cloud for, but she doesn't want to scoop it up to collect all the water from it. So she has essentially a dogfight with several fighters protecting a huge bomber-style aircraft that is trying to scoop up the last cloud on Earth, and the last bits of water. And she succeeds in seeding the cloud, and rain pours for thousands of years later on, and the world becomes green and lush again. A similar thing to this was Paths of Fate. So Paths of Fate is a World War II based video that just captures the horror and monstrosity that you turn into during the war. So it's basically a Spitfire pilot and a Messerschmitt pilot, or a Luftwaffe pilot, and they're dogfighting through the air and they're leaving these lovely trails through things. So it's all 3D, this one, where it's flat, cell shaded, minimal colour kind of thing. And they fly around and their planes get progressively damaged as they fight each other. The pilots get progressively wounded as bullets hit them, until they run out of bullets in their plane, and thus they fly around each other with their handguns out the window shooting at each other, and then they run out of almost all their bullets in their handguns, so they charge at each other head on, jump from their planes and grapple with each other mid-air. And all through this you can see transformation as their skin kind of clings tighter to their skeleton and parts pull off like a zombie effect, and then the colours slowly go redder and redder and redder, and then the crash happens, the explosion, everything turns red, they fall to the ground in the crash, and they continue crawling towards each other, and it cuts out just as one's about to punch the other, showing the endless cycle of war. Now, that short film, to my knowledge, was made with a free program called Blender. And the guy made next to no money on it, because he didn't want any money. And he made it purely because, I say he, I don't know if the creator is a he or she, so I generally just default to he or they. They generally didn't want money, and they just made it because they wanted to make it. My research and the results of my research has concluded that this is what short films are. They aren't profit-making machines like a feature film, but they're there to inspire creativity in new generations, to inspire new things. To steal a line from Star Trek, to boldly go when no one has gone before. Or not many people have gone before, as Star Trek fans regularly find out in episodes. To seek out new adventures, to seek out new worlds, and for some of them to seek out new life, because many of them like bringing characters to life and their worlds to life, and making their worlds fleshed out and lived in and working, which is the goal of a writer or a goal of a movie creator. Through more of my research into short films, I've learned that still many creatives don't fully realise what short films can or can't do. The answer simply is, you think it, you make it. Short films can make anything, everything. You just have to play to your audience. Much like with modding and fan fiction, short films can be about existing products. It can be consistent of existing products, or it can be entirely different. It can be your own creation, using names of characters to get recognition, which is one of the things that people, for some reason, don't like. It's one of the things that people don't like about fan fiction as well. Taking other people's characters, and putting them in different worlds. It's one of the things that popped up in the article from the fan fiction research, that people didn't like their characters being taken from where they had been put, so the world that you've carefully crafted, and put in a different one that someone else has carefully crafted. Even if that other world is just as carefully crafted as yours. Because in the creator's mind, or some creator's mind, it's on rails. This is where they are. This is their path. There's no change, no alternate, nothing. They just live here and they do this. Which in my mind isn't true. I like to think of stories like this as ways of telling through time. So the big theory I have on time travel, slight tangent. The theory of time travel of the world lines is my go-to theory of time travel. So there are many different world lines and many different sublines on these world lines. World lines shift based on big changes. So in the context of real life, if we lost World War I, different world line. We might not even have World War II if we lost World War I. But if we lost World War II, we'd be radically different. If we lost World War I, we'd probably be even more radically different. And so on. In the context of fan fiction, a world line shift would be taking, we'll go back to How to Train Your Dragon. A world line shift could be as simple as Hiccup doesn't shoot down Toothless.
and thus stays essentially the runt of the tribe.
Alternatively, he does shoot down Toothless,
But Toothless doesn't lose his wit. And out of his own will, he stays there and befriends Hiccup,
rather than flying away like he's Cat. Other like world line changes that you could make to a story is simply,
while staying in the same present universe. This is if Hiccup's mother never left, there could be infinite numbers of things you do there. Or if we take the latest movie, if Stoic, his father, never died, Hiccup wouldn't become chief at that time. The subsequent series, Defenders of Berk,
that is set kind of after-ish.
it's just before the second movie, but there are parts of it that are kind of after-ish, like almost flash forwards in time. He's chief, so you listen.
And this concept is quite interesting to me.
In the context of my work, this can be what I do. I can change the scene I picked, upgrade the ships to have better weapons if I wanted, like using more modern, quotation marks, modern Star Trek weapons, since Discovery happens about the same time as the original series existed. A bit later than the original series.
So you have the Enterprise E.
No, not the Enterprise E, the Enterprise B, I believe. Rather than where Next Generation is, which is the Enterprise D, which is the big Galaxy class ship, instead of the Constitution class, which is what the Enterprise in the new movies with Kirk and the Enterprise of the original series is. In fact,
If I remember correctly, the end of Discovery has Captain Pike in control of the Enterprise.
which means that the new Discovery series happens somewhere between the first movie of Star Trek, where the Romulans destroy Vulcan, and the second movie, Star Trek Into Darkness. Somewhere between there, where Pike's still in command of the Enterprise, something happens at Discovery Point, which is where Discovery appears in the timeline. Kirk takes over the Enterprise. We go into Darkness in that series line. I could use just change it a little bit and use the older Klingon ships, which probably would have been easier for my project. But I didn't do that, and I kept it relatively simple and copying it, because I wanted to see what I could do with this versus this. This is where my transcription came in, where I changed a bit of stuff which I did. So my transcription project basically was, I took a scene from an anime known as Hellsing. In fact, I didn't even take the scene from the Hellsing anime, because there are 3 different versions of this. There is the Hellsing anime, which is standard, flat, cel-shaded, old-time anime. Hellsing Ultimate, which is the same series line as what I took it from, which is the more up-to-date modern version of the storyline. It has a different kind of story to the original one, but it's basically the same. And then I took the scene itself from the Hellsing Abridged series. Not that the Hellsing Ultimate and Hellsing Abridged has much different in this scene. They're both identical. The only difference is, at the point where he draws his swords, text appears, which I didn't put in. So you could argue that I took it from the Hellsing Ultimate section.
But whereas I initially wanted to hand draw and animate this character drawing his blades from nowhere, or from his back as it's meant to be, and then appearing in the corridor with him pointing downwards, in a cross position, which is totally in character for this guy called Anderson, who is essentially a priest that kills vampires, werewolves, and leprechauns in the Abridged series. He's never found one, but you think if he and he draws the swords out, and he has a gold cross. So his colour scheme is mostly all black against the blue light coming through. And the creator of this series has a fixation with the idea that light reflecting off glasses gives someone a kind of deity or godly look. So you will regularly see in this show anyone with glasses, for brief seconds their glasses will shine at points of clarity. In the case of the main character, the vampire Alucard, and the protagonist, antagonist, Anderson, the priest paladin Anderson. Anderson has a tendency to have his glasses reflect light with a blue, blinding, bright light, whereas Alucard dresses in all red, Anderson dresses in all black, and whilst Anderson gets blue, glowy glasses, Alucard has red, like the rest of his outfit. They're more orange, but essentially red. But all light reflects bluish in the series, which is meant to give him the otherworldly deity kind of godlike look. I don't personally see it. I see it as unbridled power, which is kind of what you could say is godlike. But in this transcription, it kind of led me, because I did it before all this research was done, it led me into my machinima and taking on the work from Unit 12 and before, which is the simple phrase that all creators should abide by: copy, transform, combine. Which is the simple idea that you can take anything, change it a bit, well, dramatically in some cases, because people are a bit more picky in some cases, change it and combine it with other things to make a semi-original product that you can call your own. Case in point, people taking mods and taking it, combining it with the original game, and you have a completely different thing depending on what the mod is. Fanfictions, taking, for crossover fanfictions, it's a quite big one up there. You have AU's crossovers and canon ones. In crossover fanfictions, they take what people have said about them, so they take the universe and take another universe with other characters and mix them. Some people literally just do the rift through universes method, where a giant portal opens and everyone from one universe is sucked into the other one, or vice versa. And that works for some versions. So we have generally, if we took one that I've read quite a bit and I find very interesting because it works really well, is the Harry Potter and Full Metal Alchemist crossovers. So Full Metal Alchemist is about a boy, two brothers. One loses his entire body in an experiment with alchemy. The other one loses his arm and leg. The one who loses all his body gets his soul bound to a suit of armor, and effectively can't feel or anything like that normally. He has emotions, he just can't feel people touching him because he's a suit of armor. And it's their goal to retrieve Al, the suit of armor's body, and Ed's arm and leg. Which they want to do with the Philosopher's Stone, which is the catalyst for all alchemy, and once you have it, you can basically do anything in your god. Whereas there is an actual god in the series known as Truth. He isn't strictly God or a god, he is the truth. The truth about the universe, everything. sum of all knowledge in the universe, which sounds very much like a god. And if you commit one of the taboos of alchemy, so the one that makes you see truth, is human transmutation. Trying to make a living human. Because the idea of alchemy is that you have equal value. So you want to make, I don't know, a computer. You're going to have need all the elements you need to make a computer normally. You don't need the components, just everything that would go into making a computer. So several pounds of steel, several pounds of silicate, and so on. Then you can make an entire computer out of alchemy. Because you're using all that to make something of equal value. Whereas the entire plot line of the thing, why they need the Philosopher's Stone, which negates that value, because the Philosopher's Stone outweighs everything, is that they need something that equals a soul or an entire body to get Al's body back, as well as Ed's legs, as well as their original goal, which lost them the limbs, of resurrecting their mother. Now this is all interesting because the idea behind the crossover generally happens near the end of the Full Metal Alchemist arc, which is they fight the big bad guy who basically absorbs God and becomes God himself. As payment, they don't lose their alchemy, which is what happens in the main series. They don't lose their alchemy, and Truth, the God, sends them to the Harry Potter universe to find a Philosopher's Stone, the same one that Harry finds in the first book, which they either appear in the first book or they appear later on in the series to wreak havoc. But that's an example of portal through dimensions that work. It's like Doctor Who crossing into other stories works because the TARDIS can go anywhere. It's a storytelling machine. It takes your character wherever you want it, and there you go. It leaves whenever it wants, and it comes back whenever it wants in the story. Other ways people transfer characters over is they make it so the characters were always in the story. These are generally AU ones where they'll generally have, the most common one that happens is the high school AUs. So high school alternate universes basically makes all the characters that are teenagers and can go to high school. Normal high school, magical high school, the high school for those with superpowers in some cases. But they make them all go high school, which is why they can have characters going through all the time. A popular example of this is, again, coming back to How to Train Your Dragon, is a lovely little phrase that the community has come up, which is the brave tangled dragons, or the brave tangled frozen dragons, or something along those lines, which is basically the movie Brave, Tangled, How to Train Your Dragon, Frozen, and another one when they decide to add stuff, Guardians, mixed together, because they're all DreamWorks movies, other than Frozen, which is Disney. They're all DreamWorks, other than Frozen, and their universes kind of flow together, in a way. So, the shared universe theory of Disney, Pixar or DreamWorks is simply, it all works in its own way. Also, everyone likes the idea of Brave and Tangled being in the same universe. And then they love the idea of adding dragons. But they don't want to add murderous dragons, so they add the How to Train Dragons ones. This is Copy, Combine, Transform, which is the heart of my project at this point. As well as appealing to what community wants, because everyone likes the idea of having dragons with Miranda, who fights big old bears. Or the Guardians meeting up with other characters. But as a way of helping my project, my research into short films and how they work and how they mix and how they just flow straight into fan fiction, and then how they can be based off whatever you want, much like how mods can be based off however you want, appeals to me. It just works for me, and how it all flows together into one coherent ideal. Much like I said before, the entire goal of this project is to get creatives and people who want to make their own content working on their own content and doing what they want with their content, rather than having to worry about, oh, I don't have enough money to buy this program that I need. Well, there's free alternatives, my friend. Here they are. Well, I can't get it out to the audience. Well, get the audience to suggest things. Oh, well, I don't know who my audience is. Then figure that out before you make something. Make things and throw it out there and see who's interested. This is the idea I'm getting across, that consumers or amateur creators, the technology available to them will help them surpass commercial creatives, simply because they know what they want, and since they are similar to what everyone else is, and they can already be in communities and fandoms, they know what that fandom wants and they can market straight towards it. Whereas commercial people, they make their thing and then they see how it's received and they milk that forever. Kind of like Marvel, they made the Iron Man first Iron Man movie, success. They made the second Iron Man movie, somewhat success. They made the third Iron Man movie, still kind of a success. But they then brought in the shared universe kind of thing. So they made the first Iron Man movie, they made the second Iron Man movie, they made the Avengers. Then they made Thor, I believe, or Thor came before the Avengers. Thor, Avengers, and then after Avengers they went to the next Thor movie, whatever that one was. And then they went to the next Iron Man movie. And then they brought out, like, Captain America movies came out at some point. And then Captain America Winter Soldier came out, which basically had all the Avengers mentioned or seen at some point. And that was done with the Helicarrier Mark II, which was in Winter Soldier, where S.H.I.E.L.D. was revealed to be Hydra. And then from there they went off to, I think, Age of Ultron, maybe? And then from Age of Ultron they brought out the new helicarriers again because the original ones were destroyed in Winter Soldier. And then after that we had Sokovia, which is Age of Ultron, which led us on to Thor the Dark World, who was off gallivanting through the universe. Banner had flown off in the Quinjet in Age of Ultron, which almost directly transition us straight into Thor Ragnarok for those two. But by passing Thor Ragnarok, before Thor Ragnarok, or at the same time as Thor Ragnarok kind of deal, the Sokovia Accords and Civil War occurred, which basically is the breaking up of the Avengers. And then between the Civil War stuff and Age of Ultron, Doctor Strange comes out. But it all flows in a universe. And you can see how Marvel milks that. You love Iron Man? Well, you're going to love Thor. Kind of. Well, you're going to love this next Thor movie because it's got Iron Man in. Or well, you're going to love, like, the Avengers because it's got Iron Man. It's got Captain America. You guys love Captain America. Oh yeah, and it's got this guy with bows. We love the guy with bows. Yeah? Oh yeah, we got another Iron Man movie. Pretty cool. We got another Thor movie. Pretty cool too. We forget about the Green Lantern movie. No one cares about the Green Lantern movie. But it flows, which is what fanfiction writers are trying to do, or modders are trying to do with
communities. New mods to make it flow through the universe, or new stories through fanfiction to make it flow through the universe. Maybe someone stopped writing the books, so someone decided to continue as a fanfiction writer. Or someone just wants more content for the game, so they go off and mod it. Or just someone wants more, or someone wants to tribute something to someone and they want a thing to do it in. This is how consumers can breed commercial people. This is how it's going to be done. This is what it will be. Give it 5 years and those who are beating them as amateur creatives will become the commercial creatives. And the cycle will begin again. Simple, easy, perfect. As stated above in my review of my research, I did 5 practical research tasks that, in their own rights, have informed my project quite some bit. The first bit of research that I did initially in practical that was inside the game, Space Engineers and its engine, was work with drones, like I said, and how the drone system works. So the drone system works with GPS coordinates very simply in game, and the drones can fly there and perform actions once it gets there. The actions are very limited, only limited to 4, but you can increase this up to 7 once you add a time block. If you add another time block that needs to be triggered by the time block you've just added, you add 3, which means you're up to 9, 10 even, I can count. You're up to 10 things that your ship can do once it reaches the block. Once it reaches a block, you can make it do anything from shoot a weapon to turn off its all its power and drop out of the sky. This in itself proved an interesting concept to play around with in Space Engineers, because the drones are quite clunky, as I discovered. So during my drone work, I got a few types of drones to fly around different mappy kind of areas that I constructed and perform tasks at certain points. So some, when they hit the GPS, exploded. Some, when they hit the GPS, fired their weapons. As a result, I was able to eventually set up quite complex routes and have them do a myriad of tasks before going back to the start and repeating. The one thing I observed with the drones, and thus the drone system for Space Engineers, is that the drones don't fly in smooth patterns between each checkpoint. They will fly straight towards a checkpoint, slow down, stop on the checkpoint, turn to the next one, then fly forwards. They won't, however, use the checkpoint as a point to curve. You can't set it to do that at all. So you can't tell it to go to this point in a nice big curve, because in order to do that you need to set a lot of small checkpoints from each other, and essentially it has to go at a certain speed around the course to get that curve you want, which in turn is a very, very tedious and difficult job to do, since the GPS is full where your character is, and the character doesn't exactly fly in the best of lines itself. Or it's hard to keep in a straight line. As a result, the drones flew in straight lines, and you needed to use I needed to use camera trickery in order to make it look like it was curving. This, however, proved not as viable as you might think, since in the scene I was recreating, you can directly see the ship curving away whilst looking straight at the force field and town. This by itself
couldn't be replicated with drones because they stopped whenever you wanted them to turn. And so I moved on from there to drone work using gravity cannons and the blocks known as gravity generators and mass cubes, which allow mass to be added to the ships and be thrown around by artificial gravity caused by the gravity generators. These in turn allowed me to throw ships at a constant speed, since Space Engineers deals with Newtonian physics, and once you go to a normal speed, if you don't have any forces acting on you, you carry on at that speed. Once they hit the speed that the gravity cannons, well, I set up gravity cannon to pulse, so once it turned on and then off again, the ship would be set at whatever speed it was when it left. As long as I set the ships up at the same level as each other, they would all have the same amount of acceleration and the same speed once the gravity cannon turned off. This, however, also fell through as a plan, since I didn't take into account that ships, when thrown, especially since the ships I was using were quite small and the blocks had to go at the back of the ship, had a tendency to curve upwards or go in a straight line, but the ship would roll or pitch itself and tumble through space, which didn't look like controlled flight in the way I wanted it to. The other problem was that these ships, one shot, couldn't turn or move themselves. The solution that I could have done is made it a remote control ship and turn on the remote control when it's fired out of the cannon, thus it will fly towards the GPS as best as it could, giving it a kind of curve. This in turn would have brought up problems of configuring time blocks to match in sync with each other and being able to trigger them as the character quick enough that I can then switch back into the spectator camera, which is essentially the film camera, and follow them, which would be about a second to do that, which is not enough time to produce what I wanted. As a result, the drone idea was overall scrapped, mostly. So, I want to still use the drones, but I'm going to have to modify how they do what they do. So the idea I have already is as they bomb the shield, which they do, they fire at the shield gets hit, the last one hits and breaks down the shield, and then the last one that is shot goes into the buildings. These three then carry on off, and then off screen, carry on forwards. There's a cut to where the Discovery comes in. These three more go across like they would go for another run, and I would pan the camera with them to give them that kind of curve, which I can do in this next shot. Discovery comes in, blows them up, which will be done with timer blocks, which means I'm actually going to have to set the time blocks. Well, I can spawn ships that have everything activated, so I can spawn the ships in sequence with a calculated time between them, between spawning. Go to my spectator cam, watch them go across, then blow up, and then switch to the other shots, which are straight runs on the Discovery. The next bit of practical research after this I did was actually experimenting with the scenes and sets and what I could actually do with in-game assets and working with blocks to make assets sets to work kind of places and sets to work with to replicate things. So to make assets or the ships and buildings, I first of all needed to know what I could do with the blocks. So I set up the first experiment, which was what effects do blocks give when damaged. So to do this one, I set up all the blocks, all the function blocks that I knew of, or all the function blocks that would provide large enough targets, I should say, around a central Gatling turret in the middle, since you can control Gatling turrets in the game and they have cameras on them so you can aim them. I then proceeded with Gatling turret to shoot a object until it was damaged and no longer working and giving off an effect. This in turn allowed me to see what effects were giving off. That gave me the information of there are only 3 effects in Space Engineers that are given off when an object is damaged. That is, simply put, fire, grey smoke with electricity, and green smoke. Fire only comes from certain objects, electricity comes from most objects with smoke, and then green smoke only comes from reactors. Hydrogen engines, ion engines, oxygen generators, arc furnace, oxygen generators, hydrogen tanks, oxygen tanks, and a few others, gravity generators, and a few other parts generate fire. Everything else will generate electric sparks with smoke. There was, on some blocks, the electric sparks do arc towards the nearest metal object. In this case, it will always arc towards the nearest armor block attached to the block itself, which gives all the arcs of electricity either upwards, sideways, or downwards arcs compared to your perspective you're looking at them. This does mean that you don't generally get arcs of lightning waving off into the air, and it all very much clings to the ship, to the part and its surrounding area as it does this. The next experiment after that I did to do with damage was I set up all the weapons in the game, the standard weapons in the game, and shot them at large block light armor targets that were 5x5. I chose 5x5 because it would give 5 layers of armor. Not that any of my ships would have 5 layers of armor, and it provided a large target so we could actually see how much damage they would do. That concluded with any kind of sustained fire from any of the weapons in the game would result in damage to whatever I'm shooting at that would become recognizable to the camera in seconds. This, however, brought on a bit of concern since I needed to shoot at the ships that were attacking the Discovery and the colony, i.e. the warbirds, so that it looks like we're fighting back and not just sitting there. This led me on to remember several mods that I could install and have installed and used, such as the Bubble Shield mod, which adds a bubble-like shield around objects. This is what I used for the shield for the colony. Skin-tight shields, which are just known as energy shields as a mod, which I added on to the Discovery, as well as no, I just added it to Discovery. I also experimented with adding it to the colony, but decided against that since they were going to get bombed and damaged anyway, and their shield should have failed, so they would get damaged. As a result, I also then decided that I would install a Star Wars weapons mod, because I had used this mod before, and the weapons were able to fire in different colours, whereas the Star Trek mod doesn't actually show the beams of the weapons all the time. As such, I used the Star Wars mod, and because the Discovery hails from the new Star Trek timeline and technology ideas, they don't have straight beams of energy like the original series had straight beams, and the newer Next Generation series has straight photon phasers, as they're called, beams. These ones have kind of charged bolts that can be shot, which is what the Star Wars weapons produce themselves very easily. And so I was able to use blue Star Wars weapons on the Star Trek Discovery ship, the Discovery, to be able to produce the blue fire that you see from the Discovery. I also used them on the Birds of Prey. Birds of Prey produce green blaster bolts and torpedoes. This ultimately also proved a challenge to implement because most of the turrets I wanted to use, since I was mainly using turrets, were too big to put onto the small ships that I had. So I ended up having to use smaller ones that didn't quite look the same. And then for the Birds of Prey, I ended up having to use fixed. Well, I experimented with fixed weapons as well as the turrets on them. And both weapons operated quite well, but they also didn't quite work the way I expected them or wanted them to work, since the drones weren't able to directly aim or independently at a target. So I'd get a bit creative with that and add in a block called a decoy block. And decoy block basically puts itself, since turrets have a fire order, so they will go after gyroscopes, reactors, cargo containers, so on, down to normal blocks. Whereas a decoy basically makes it so the turret targets that before everything else. In the context of the game, you're meant to use decoys on your ship to direct fire to non-critical systems, or you're meant to launch decoys from your ship as a way to draw enemy turrets away from your ship and thus attack yourself better. In the case of my project, I used them on the colony to draw the turret's fire to particular areas, which then I could set the range of the turrets to almost a minimum range, which means when the drone flew past, it had to get within that range to fire, and thus would fire at the right point in time. The problem then arose with, once it got to that point, it would fire continuously until it left its combat range. This, I then had to experiment with timer blocks and use of timer blocks in order to stop the weapons firing after a certain time. So on launch, timing block would tick down until we had it shoot, and then after that it would shut off. The one that needed to shoot more would have slightly longer before it shut off in order to get that second, third, fourth shot off. After I'd done all this with drone work, I decided to upgrade the models of my buildings as well as the models of the drones themselves. So I built a new version of the Bird of Prey that doesn't look exactly like the Bird of Prey you see in the series, because Space Engineers doesn't quite handle curves the way you would like it to handle curves to make a Bird of Prey like you saw in the series. But given this constraint, I think I did pretty well in replicating the Bird of Prey, at least for short snippets of footage. If you look at it not very hard, you can see it's nowhere near being the Bird of Prey. But this is an example of me changing its style to suit my purposes and to suit the restrictions and limitations of the program. I'm pretty sure more experienced players of Space Engineers or builders on Space Engineers would be able to curve the insides a bit more using angled blocks and such, but I myself couldn't. I could have used rotors for the curve because they're able to bend, but rotors come with a tendency and a power that all Space Engineers players know very well, called clang. Now clang is a serious problem for Space Engineers, where subgrids, which are the tops of piston heads and rotors, so parts that other parts can move, so pistons pushing things around and rotors spinning things around, have a tendency to glitch out, and pistons are the worst for it because when they glitch out they become noodles essentially that fling around the universe, whereas rotors when they glitch out just kind of wiggle and you tell it to lose its head. You have to go into the commands for the rotor and detach the head, erase that, add a new head and build whatever you had on top of it again. Same with piston, you have to physically erase the piston then the top. If you can, if not you ditch the world and start all over again. Which is why most of the time I try to stay away from pistons. I don't stay away from rotors because rotors are the safer option for Clang, at least. But when moving at high speed, such as the Birds of Prey were during these scenes, it is not advisable to use rotors since they don't lock good enough to move at those speeds. I upgraded the buildings and stuff, the buildings and terrain. I used the inbuilt voxel tool to construct mountains, cliff faces and more to recreate the terrain you see in the clip. And with that I also went on to create slimmer, more realistic looking buildings. Since the original clip doesn't quite have the same depth as I ended up having, because it's meant to be a much larger area that you're looking down on, whereas Space Engineers wouldn't allow such a large area to be built, and use of lots of small blocks, which I could have done, ends up dropping the sim speed and lagging the game quite heavily, which is what the Discovery model I had did. The Birds of Prey weren't that bad because they were only a couple of hundred blocks and were pretty basic compared to Discovery, which was a couple of thousand blocks. But the buildings, I then used the practical research I did on damaged blocks with other parts that gave me smoke effects, lightning, fire effects on top, using hydrogen thrusters like they were burning something, as well as toxic green smoke coming out the tops, which wasn't in the scene or shot itself, but I felt like that needed a bit of extra character. You see briefly the tops of some of the refinery towers as the camera zooms in on the Discovery, and you can see tiny bits of flames in that. So I took a little bit of artistic liberty and added a bit more to do more with it. The limitations I found with the voxel tool is very simply, unless I built on the moon or planet where the Discovery model, the Bird of Prey model weren't designed to fly, so it would have crashed and I would have had to build different versions of those, which would have detracted from the looks and made it more difficult to fit new parts in, such as timers and explosives for other scenes, or even turrets and weapons to perform their basic job. I could have made a much larger area and thus made a slightly more detailed or more perspective, or a scene with better perspective in it to use, but I wasn't able to do that for the limitations I said. Instead I built it using an asteroid grid, so asteroids appear all over the map, but they only have a certain area you can they can generate in. So I used the full area, and it's not quite large enough for the full perspective that you could see in the shot. As a result, it kind of seems much tighter made, and the town seems much, much bigger than it should be, considering the mountains behind it are smaller than the town in my shot, depending how I angle it. In conclusion, my practical research has informed me that I need to work on different methods of using the drones, or utilize or change the way the scene is kind of set up to utilize the drones, or set up a more precise gravity cannon to shoot stuff, which can be set up on timer blocks. That way I can shoot something, record it, and not have to worry about that part. And so on. My other conclusion is that, simply put, my research has led me, idea-wise, background to where I was, and that my project is actually changing more to be less about this scene and the recreation of it, and more about just the limitations and what you can do with the program itself. So I'm probably I'm changing my project slightly now to not have the final piece be strictly this scene recreated. So I will have snippets of the scene being recreated, which I'll extract from my research recordings, but essentially my final piece is going to be the full research recording I have for my piece. That after a bit of editing will be essentially a speed creation and demonstration of skills. My choice to do this is, simply put, I don't have the full capabilities yet with the program. I need to research more into modifications that I might be able to make, and so on, that just slow down the load time. So at the moment, the load time for this world to get into it, to record stuff, or just experiment with, because it's all done in one world, since it keeps everything neat and tidy in one location, and it has all the modifications I need, is about 3 minutes to 4 minutes long, which is quite a long time to wait to then get into a program to then play with it for a couple of hours. Because another limitation I have been wrestling with is the fact that Space Eagerness takes up so much RAM and heats up the computer or my laptop so quickly that every once in a while I have to shut down the world, not the program, just the world, let the computer cool down, and then carry on like normal. This in turn provides me with only a few hour recording sessions. I can run it for longer. I ran a full day recording on the program, or full day of just running the world, or most of the day, because I stopped at lunch and then restarted it. And by the time lunch came round, my computer was currently running with a CPU core temperature of 95 degrees and a graphics processor temperature of about 76, which is firmly in the red and danger zone for a burnout of the computer. So I decided to run smaller, shorter sessions to avoid damage to the computer itself. Because if I lose the computer, I wouldn't be able to do the project at all. My research into short films, mods and fan fiction used by the lens of community has helped me transform my project less about machinima and what I want to do with cameras, into how community affects products, and how amateur creators can use the tools and free tools and technology available to them in order to surpass or be equivalent to the commercial world, through use of appealing to their communities rather than massive demographic audiences like real people, like massive companies. After all, they are real people. and basically playing towards those who want to write fan fictions and making your world as rich as possible, but leaving it open-ended also can invite people to change it and add to it. So my idea is less fixed on you need this to do this, and now think about your community more than your project in some cases. Think how you can get essentially almost free advertising for your product through fan fictions, because if someone reads, someone watches your thing, tells someone else, and then they watch it and then write a fan fiction about it, and then someone else reads their fan fiction and tells someone else, you should check this out, this fan fiction out, it's really, really good. Oh, what's it about? Oh, it's about this TV series or this short film that he watched, and like he loved it and he really open-ended it, and he just wanted to continue the story because it was so good. Suddenly that's another person who now knows about your series, can read that fan fiction or watch your series first, or short film or whatever you made, and go straight on to watch more if you make more in the future, or start following you to see if you're going to make more, and just researching about you to see if you're going to make more, whatever it be. And creatives can do this for cheap, if not free, not make any money out of it if they don't want, but they can do it for free, easily, with free programs, and still be up there with a few of the smaller big companies, still be there with a few thousand people following them, without the need to make big blockbuster films or even really expensive short films. And that's the general idea, and that's the conclusion I come to, that my idea needs to adapt and change a bit into what can community do to creators, and how can creators use these programs to affect the community. And that's what I've discovered.